Hi folks, this is Abel James, and thanks so much for joining us on Fat Burning Man, where we talk about real food and real results. This week's show is with Tawnee Prazak, an endurance coach who specializes in optimizing your health and performance at the same time. You're going to learn how to become fat adapted for endurance sports, how to reduce cortisol and avoid overtraining, and why you should eat more fat, especially if you're an athlete. Before we get to the show, I want to take a quick second to plug our new and improved membership community, the Fat Burning Tribe. When you start going against the grain and eating real food and exercising differently, incredible things can happen. But do you ever feel like you're going at it alone? People around you might say, "Hey, how's your new diet going? Why aren't you eating that sandwich like everyone else?" Or eating all that fat is going to stop your heart, you know? Well, if the naysayers around you are dragging you down, we've got something special for you. The biggest thing most people are missing when they start transforming their bodies is support from like-minded people. So my wife, Allison, and I decided to create an online community to share our outrageously tasty recipes, fat-burning workouts, and healthy living tips all in one place. We update the members area at least 3 times a week with a new video, recipe, article, or exclusive giveaway. Every month, Allison and I hop in front of the camera to answer your questions on how to upgrade your health in a world that seems stacked against you. So if you'd like to join us, we've opened up a few spots for you to join for just $1 for your first month. We'll be closing the doors on this offer pretty soon, so don't miss out. Just go to fatburningtribe.com to sign up. Once again, that's fatburningtribe.com. We have hundreds of members from all corners of the globe rocking out right now in the tribe, and our community is getting results. Here's a success story from one of our new members, Lulu. In just a couple of weeks eating the wild diet way, 5.5 pounds gone, 2 inches in my waist and 3 inches in my hips, out of here. Thanks, Abel and Allison. I know with adding more weights and sprints, I will continue to soar. By the way, if I eat white bread now, I get terrible stomach pains. My body is wanting the good stuff now. Thanks, Lulu. So try our wild pumpkin bread instead. It's way better than boring old white bread, and you won't get disaster pants. So here are a few goodies we just added to the tribe. A 7-minute wild workout video and a handy timer tool where I walk you through the best exercises to tone your body and burn fat. Step-by-step details on how to identify hidden sugar in your food. That's a big one. New ketogenic coffee recipes, and a video teaching you how to hand roast your own coffee at home using a few simple tools you probably already have, and it's way easier than you think. Also, delicious recipes for smoothies, bone broth, pulled pork sliders, and tons more. This is just a little taste of what you get when you join the tribe. If it sounds like something you want to be a part of, or if you have a question for me or my wife, join today for just $1. You can go to fatburningtribe.com. Go check it out. All right, so on to the show with Tawnee Prazak. She's a holistic endurance coach with a master's in exercise physiology and strength and conditioning. She specializes in working with female athletes to regain health and hormonal balance. After years of giving all of her heart to triathlon and endurance racing, Tawnee took a step back to optimize overall health and wellness. Tawnee's journey offers a changing perspective on what it means to be fit. In this show, you'll learn how to fine-tune your nutrition for endurance sports, how to reduce cortisol and avoid overtraining, steps to increase performance without sacrificing your health, why you should eat more fat, especially if you're an athlete, and much more. All right, let's go hang out with Tawnee. All right, folks, Tawnee Prazak is a Laguna Beach, California-based holistic coach and host of Endurance Planet, a podcast focused on endurance sports. We're going to hit on a lot of things that I don't usually get to talk about on this show. Tawnee, I'm so glad you're here.
I'm glad too. It's kind of surreal to be seeing your face right now because I'm so used to listening to your show and hearing you talk to all your great people that you have on, and it's an honor to be one of those people now.
Oh, thank you. Well, it's awesome to have you here. You've definitely earned your stripes, I think, at this point.
Oh, well, thank you. And it's so, again, it's also funny to be like on the other side of things because usually I'm in your shoes right now,
Right.
you know, with my like list of things that I'm going to ask and da-da-da. So I always like being on this end of it though.
Cool. Well, I definitely think that we're going to get into some things that people don't get to hear that much about. Why don't we start, though, with a little bit about your background, what you've been doing for the past 10 plus years in the realm of endurance sports specifically, and how diet relates to all of that, your own personal journey, because there are plenty of ups and downs, and we could talk about all of it.
Well, first, without making it too long, it's probably best if people do want to get more information, because I'm going to give you guys like the Cliff Notes version right now.
Yeah.
I do blog about a lot of this stuff, and this, dates back. I started my blog back in 2007 or 2008. It's triton.com. And I've since, as things have evolved, I've gotten even more open about my experiences with diet and, what happens when an endurance athlete takes things too far, So I got into triathlon my senior year in college, and I was at San Diego State, and I just madly fell in love with that. I'm like, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. I love this endurance sports world. It's everything. And I ended up, making my whole career out of it. I even went on to grad school, which wasn't really part of the plan because my undergraduate degree was in journalism, but I went on to grad school to study kinesiology, emphasis in exercise physiology and strength and conditioning, with the intention of just building a career out of coaching and, being just everything I could do in this world. Meanwhile, I was racing a ton. I mean, it just everything from sprint triathlons to half Ironmans to full Ironmans, although I was a little I wasn't so quick to jump into a lot of full Ironmans because I knew there's a huge commitment behind that. But for most of my 20s, I probably was racing on average about once a month. And, at this point in my life, I've done 60, 70 plus endurance races. And I was pretty good for a while. I mean, I was consistently top 10, if not on the podium in my division every time I raced. So then, there's that added pressure to perform and get better and get faster. And I'm a very type A perfectionist kind of gal. Yeah. And, it just, I had that drive and that motivation to just go for it. And I loved it so much. It was my whole world was just, this triathlon stuff and the endurance stuff. And it was so much fun. But, there comes a point where I think sometimes what started off innocently enough can take a bit of a turn where it's not so fun anymore. You're finding that you've reached that point of diminishing returns and performance even starts to decline. And, as I was getting a little bit older, not that I'm using age as an excuse, but just, the wear and tear on the body and everything, things started happening and my mental state was, I'd find that I was moodier and more irritable than I should be. Issues, like just navigating the tricky world of nutrition and diet and highs and lows there and just all this stuff. And worst of all was, my health started to tank. It just, my health started to tank. I knew it, I felt it. I started getting some of these functional health tests, blood tests and whatnot. But then when I really saw it was actual results on the race course and things just took a quick downward spiral. And I, at that point I was smart enough and had a bigger, sense of all this to know that I needed to step back rather than trying to be stubborn and try to push through. It wasn't something that you could just push through, if you will. And especially, my role as a coach and someone who studied this stuff at a master's level education and everything, knowing how these systems are integrated and work together. So I took a step back and really dived into what was going on. And that started around 2012, 2013 or so. And man, it's been the best journey since then because it's like this whole new adventure that I'm on, kind of reaching that bottom, if you will, and rebuilding back up and using all these tools and resources without going, a traditional Western medicine approach of, the Band-Aid solutions, if you will, but rebuilding my body holistically, naturally, and all that. And now at where I'm at right now, thriving and just being so comfortable with the journey that I've been on. So in a nutshell, that's kind of the personal story of the athletic history.
I love it. So what is, if there is one thing that you want people to know about that entire journey and encapsulating it all into that it's hard to do, right? Putting it all into one piece of advice to someone who might be interested or in the process of doing endurance training. But what is that biggest nugget that you've learned?
Easy. Listen to your body.
Yeah.
Listen to your body, because I think especially in the world of endurance sports, triathlon, maybe even more so than running, although running I see it a lot too, we get so addicted to this idea of a training plan and what needs to be done for a certain race, or we get so addicted to a certain pace that we need to hold, or a time goal that we've set to, finish a particular race in. And again, that was it for me. It was like, okay, I've gone this fast in a half Ironman. Now I got to go faster, faster, faster. When in reality, that can sometimes leave you disconnected from what your body's trying to tell you.
Right.
So that would definitely be the biggest thing.
I'm so glad that you said that. So what does that mean though? If we could dig in
it's really hard.
a little more.
That's really hard. So just even understanding what that means is, a journey in itself. And, these are topics a lot, what I've really kind of honed in my podcast, Endurance Planet, things that we address a lot these days. And it's funny because a lot of our shows are Q&A based. So we get a lot of our fans and listeners asking all these questions. And it's really hard to always give concrete answers because a lot of times we have this ongoing joke where it's like, well, it depends.
Yeah.
So listening to your body is going to depend on what your current situation is. For me, I was, in my late 20s, female athlete who had been racing hard for almost a decade. And that's going to be very different than, 50 plus year old male who's working full time with kids and family,
right.
What his needs are versus what my needs were at that point. So it really comes down to then, I think, and why I've really angled my coaching for athletes as holistic is that there's all these different pieces of the puzzle that we got to look at. So, I think there's definitely some general red flags and signs that we need to look for and traps that, are pretty common that people fall into. And, nutrition and diet is one of them. So we can certainly talk about that since I know that's a huge theme on your show. But it's also just, like I was saying about myself, like the irritability or, mood swings and things like that, or the inability, like I'm sure a lot of athletes can relate to this. Like if I'll go out and do a typical route in my neighborhood, a running route, and I know if I'm feeling good, what pace or what heart rate or whatever I should be on any certain point. And if that's slower, or if I'm forced to walk, or if my heart rate's extremely high and elevated, these are all red flags. And sometimes it's better to walk away from that workout, but then we get stubborn and we don't want to, and we just keep going, Or, with like diet and nutrition, also related to like weight loss or weight gain. And you often see athletes, even though they're working out so hard, they can't even lose weight. And it just, to them, it doesn't make sense. But then that's when I want to start saying, okay, well, let's look at what's going on the inside hormonally, cortisol levels. As again, females present a ton of issues with the type of balance we need. And, endurance sports, a lot of times it praises, lean body mass and low body fat percentage, when in reality for females, that can be really, really dangerous territory. And again, like I know, like even for me, those borderline numbers, like what's too low for me, what's my ideal amount, and what's going to make me function optimally in terms of my hormonal balance. So there's so much that goes into it. And they're all interconnected. We can't just like separate these things and think that they're all individual and don't have an impact on one another.
Right. Well, since it's such a moving target, especially coaching women or women who are athletes, but trying to balance that with being healthy at the same time, how do you find that balance? It's
probably the most exciting thing to do with an athlete, work, female or not, but this is the most exciting thing because again, like my whole thing is wanting to help athletes optimize health and performance, but health first. Because that's really like, if we want to have longevity, if we want to feel good decades from now, health has to come first. Performance, and you even see this with the best of the best athletes, they'll have these incredible performances, but after so many years, that's just not sustainable.
Right.
And I'm talking like incredible, unrealistic, seem to the rest of us at least, performances in sport and everything. So what I like to do is, in a way, it starts with just looking at what the athlete is presenting to begin with. So I do a very extensive questionnaire with my athletes, and we start just tackling all the things like, what is your current hormonal state? What has your training been like that potentially led you to come to me feeling like you need to achieve more balance? And a lot of times I find that people were kind of ignoring things like heart rate and stuff and wanting to train more by how fast they think they should be running. And that's
Right.
what got them into trouble, because there was too much intensity.
Yeah.
But with females too, a lot of it is the psychology. I think we do, and again, I can totally vouch for this myself. Like, there's a lot of pressure we put on ourselves to perform a certain way, to look a certain way, to act and feel and be a certain way, and be all these perfectionist things. And what it all comes down to is that these are stressors, and managing the stress in our lives can get tricky. And we need to learn how to know what are our triggers and what's the right amount of stress to have, because we're never going to get rid of stress. It's just learning how to manage it better.
So when you start to see things taking a nosedive, and not only is your kind of health going into a tailspin, but your performance is going down, how do you dig yourself out of that? Because a lot of times, there's so much identity for athletes put into their performance, what they do every day. But if you turn an ankle or you blow a knee or something like that, all of a sudden your identity is gone, and you feel like you're living in a black hole. So how did you deal with that?
I know, it's like worse than getting an injury. And there's, a whole process for getting injury. It's, first is the acceptance aspect of it. So, going back to that year for me, it was, such a turning point in my athletic career. It was 2013. My now fiance and I were training for Ironman Tahoe, which was an insane race. I had also qualified for the 70.3 World Championships again in Ironman. So those two races were going to be 2 weeks apart, and those were in September. And that year, I just put a lot on myself. The podcast was growing, so I had more exposure to the endurance world and everything. So that was an added pressure. But then, like I said, I just saw, weird things happening, performance declining. And at those two races, they were just not pretty endings, without going into too much detail. And then after that Ironman, I said, all right, something's got to change here. At that point, I had already done the initial stuff of taking the blood tests, the saliva hormonal tests, measuring cortisol, female hormones, all those things. So I had at least ammo to say, okay, it's not just me being crazy in my head. Like, there's absolute evidence here that I am depleted, rock bottom. And why should I keep going on? I mean, why would I just keep fighting what I know needs to change? And so it's like with injury, you just need to learn how to accept it and then figure out what your next goal needs to be. So what I like to, with similar athletes, like I did with myself, it's like, okay, well, now let's look at this as if it's its own race. It's its own thing that you need to train for and get yourself up to be. Because I think that's what we sometimes miss. It's that drive and that desire to have an end goal, like something that we're working toward. When you're not racing and you have the type of personality that needs like a race or something on the calendar to keep you going, kind of get you up out of bed in the morning. Well, if you're finding that all this racing, you love it so much, but now it's working against you, well, let's kind of like change our perspective on it and think about how we can make this achieving one's health a goal in itself. And then once I did that for myself, it was like, all right, let's do this. Like, what can I do? I built up a team of functional health specialists that were really, really willing to just kind of look at me from all angles and take me in and say, like, here's the test data, here's what you present, like, let's fix this. And then my number one thing throughout all of it is doing this stuff naturally, because then, you have these messages like, oh, well, just go on birth control to balance out your hormones. And, for a lot of girls experiencing amenorrhea, for example, just use that to stimulate the period. And in the meantime, eat more and train less. And, these are things a girl does not want to hear.
Right.
And especially with the birth control, I mean, I'm sure you guys have talked about this with past guests on your show. It's just not an area that I think most people should go. It's not a solution. It's a Band-Aid.
Sure.
So figuring these things out, well, why is a woman's menstruation going away in the first place? Let's figure out the root cause of that. And more often than not, you find that it's actually more stress related than it really is about the training. Yeah. And you look at the HPA axis and everything, and when your brain is sending signals to shut that process down, there's a reason for it. And it's usually it's more about the stress overall, even more so in my experience in people than what your current body weight is. Because you could have a girl who's perfectly within a healthy range in terms of her weight and body fat, but still experiencing, some pretty severe hormonal problems to the point of amenorrhea. Go ahead.
So how do you do something that's inherently stressful without too much cortisol or without too much damaging types of stress?
So in terms of the training and everything? Yeah. So, you got to give some time off just to let go of that compulsive need to exercise the way you once knew. For me, it was, a process of still being friends with, but parting ways with my current coach and realizing that just being told what workout had to be done every day wasn't necessarily a good thing for me at that point. And then figuring out ways to still kind of meet that desire to stay active and healthy, but in different ways. So this is when I started getting into backpacking and stand-up paddleboarding and just hiking and walking instead of having to run always, or mountain biking, things like that. Things that are going to be lower, like have a completely different connotation. It's not necessarily about performance anymore. Now it's just about getting outside and loving and enjoying the process of movement and everything.
Yeah.
I'm also a huge fan of strength training. So, kettlebells put me in the gym. Like that's always been something I've really been driven to do, no matter what.
But I thought that if women lifted weights, they start to look like Arnold Schwarzenegger. Is that
I look
not
like
true?
Arnold?
I know, seriously. I get that so much. Can you please just do a quick little bit for women on the benefits of strength training?
First of all, let me just say, I wish I could keep on more muscle mass, but it's just not as easy as, just hormonally speaking. We just don't have that level of testosterone, and it's just not going to happen. I think really though, what it comes down to is that, some women are actually going to maybe bulk up a little bit more, but what happens is that if your diet's sort of out of whack at the same time, you're not going to get the desired results that you want. So it's not just about what you're doing in the gym. It's about what you're doing in the kitchen, to kind of have that healthy balance. But at the end of the day, unless you're really going hardcore into like a bodybuilding regimen and you're taking God knows what kind of supplements or other things, you just physiologically, it's not going to happen. It just won't.
Yeah.
I know a few women that are big, that are, firefighters, and they're in a profession where their whole life revolves around strength. But I kind of feel like that's almost like you look at the like chicken or the egg. I think they're kind of a unique beast to begin with. And so their profession chose them. But generally it doesn't work that way.
What does it do?
It actually is a huge component in bringing back good hormonal health. I mean, what
Thank
you can get, especially coming from a heavy endurance routine where you're just kind of depleting yourself in a way, the strength training can come in and actually have the exact opposite result and restore and replenish all those hormones. And you get the right amount of testosterone surge and all these other hormones that are not only going to make our bodies, more ideal in terms of the composition, but also just make us look better, make our skin complexion, all that stuff look better, our hair look better, all of the above.
Right.
So there's a lot of added benefits to strength training. Plus, it just feels good to be strong. It doesn't feel good to be weak.
Yes. Right. Yeah. When I was running marathons, I was down to like 147, and generally for the past few years, I've been like 100.
No way.
Yeah, I've been 167. So I can't tell you how good it felt to put that muscle back on. It's just something that you feel more human, don't you?
Yeah,
you can
it's
do
totally
stuff.
True. The first time I did it, I did a stand-up paddleboard race this year, and it wasn't because I didn't want, I wasn't looking for something to take place of what triathlon had given me, but I just kind of wanted to see what it was all about. And it was the first time I finished a somewhat endurance race. It was like an hour long, but I felt like I had this surge of hormones. All of a sudden, my body just felt like raw. I could like hold my paddleboard over my head, and I just felt so strong. Versus usually when I finish a triathlon, all I want to do is keel over and die, and I feel completely like depleted because I've left it all out on the course,
Yeah.
And you know how that is going from marathons and all that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, I think what kind of getting back to your original question, though, is like once then, say you do this process, you figure out what your formula needs to be, and everyone, it's going to be somewhat unique. You retest, you see where you're at, you see how you're rebuilding yourself up. And I did this myself, periodically retesting to make sure things are going in the right direction. Well, then, yes, how do you reintroduce exercise? Because it's not like you have to give it up forever. How do you reintroduce it safely? And my answer to that is, of course, to listen to your body. But we need to take a more moderate approach and not just jump back into intensity, not jump back into setting the goal, like what you want the end result to be. Like let the journey unfold as it will. So for me, I took on a marathon, an open marathon, which I'd only done a marathon and Ironman at this point. And my number one goal was to stay healthy through it. So I did a very unconventional approach to how I trained for this marathon. And yeah, I had the goal of qualifying for Boston. So I guess I did kind of have a little bit of that time goal on it. Sure. But I knew based on like what my comfortable aerobic paces were, that it was a totally realistic goal. It's not like I was asking my body to go sub-3 in a marathon or something.
Yeah.
And so I trained in a way that even a couple of days, a couple times where I was scratching my head being like, am I doing enough for this? Like, I know I'm healthy right now and I feel great, but is it going to translate to a performance that I want on race day? And it did, and it was really letting go of that drive and impulse to kind of be overly addicted to, you do a little bit of training one week, so you do more the next week and you keep going with it, and listening, like be more even keel with it. So I like to use a method called the MAF method. Have you heard of it?
I've heard of it.
Okay, so it's by Dr. Phil Maffetone, who's become a great friend and my own personal advisor, so it's great. But it's 180 minus your age is kind of the basic foundation of it, as in terms of what heart rate you need to use when you're training at. And so for me, that was 150. So I did pretty much, I'd say 95% of my training for this marathon all at that MAF heart rate. And the idea being that you can stay healthy because you're not overextending yourself and dipping into too much intensity, while still getting super efficient at that heart rate and faster in the speed that you want to have. And now the catcher with it, though, is if something's still going wrong in terms of health or whatnot, you're going to find that your body's not necessarily increasing in performance. So then we got to hack away at what else is going on. What other variables could be taking a toll here? Is it your health that's, or is your diet out of whack? So then that's where, again, like the fun part is like, it's not just about what you're doing in your training. It's about all of living that makes a difference.
So let's shift gears a little bit then and talk about diet, because I know that you've done some, I feel comfortable saying unconventional things as it comes to, especially low carb, high fat, plus endurance, pretty intense stuff. Can you talk about why that's good, why that's bad? There's definitely a lot of people who are asking about it recently. So I'm curious about your take on it.
Yeah, it's a fun area of interest to me because there's just so much, good information coming out these days that's really challenging conventional ways. And I think early on, I sort of had the seed planted to know better than to just continually fuel on sugar. And I still bought into the goos and the gels and the sugar-based fuels, but I still wasn't the type of person who every 15 minutes, would be slamming down gels and stuff just because it didn't really seem right to me.
Yeah.
And so when this idea of, being able to train on less sugar and everything started to really kind of gain momentum, it was really intriguing for sure. And it's not that at first for me, it wasn't eliminating all sugar, but it was about better managing what you're putting into your body while you're fueling. And I think there's just so much good research. Like we've done some series on Endurance Planet looking into this. There's finally actually peer-reviewed research going on looking at low-carb, high-fat diets versus more traditional higher-carb diets in elite endurance athletes and, going over the results of what all this stuff entails. And, there's some basic concepts of what comes from it. You obviously learn to be more fat adapted and use fat for fuel, which spares glycogen, which means you can go longer. And what this also means is other, side benefits of things like you're not needing to fuel as much during a race. So this again from marathon training, I'm sure, at least hearing horror stories of if you're fueling too much, the GI distress, your body just cannot take in all that and expect to use it while you're now trying to, be at race pace or whatever. So for the fat adapted athlete, it has that
making me nauseous just thinking about it right now.
Oh God, right? I mean, how many times? Oh yeah, it's nasty. So there's less fuel for racing, so therefore less risk of GI issues and everything. Plus, I think the bigger take home or, ringing endorsement for it is just looking at things from a health perspective, not just a performance perspective. So you'll see things like less inflammation in the body, the ability to jump back and recover more quickly from workouts, the ability to actually put on that lean muscle mass, not constantly being in a catabolic state. You want to really look at being at homeostasis as much as possible and not always on these fluctuations, what sugar tends to do. You spike and then you crash, you spike and then you crash. And for the endurance athlete who needs to put in a good amount of time of training, this is a vicious cycle that we could get trapped in. So bringing that higher fat approach into it helps keep you more stable throughout your training and your racing. And it's especially beneficial for endurance, and it's especially beneficial when you're combining it with more of the moderate aerobic approach, which, let's face it, anything over 90 seconds is technically an endurance sport. So, so if we're looking to train your aerobic metabolism and, not being totally anaerobic all the time, and anaerobic is where you're going to be burning more glycogen, and aerobic is where you want to be more in your fat burning mode, then it only makes sense to, combine that with fat and as part of your dietary plan and not being a total sugar burner carb addict. So, but it gets tricky though, and even getting back to my own journey with this, when I first started kind of experimenting with it around 2012, 2013, and I didn't eliminate all carbs, nor did I ever go to the extremes of like a ketogenic diet.
Yeah.
I was still overtrained and overtraining, so my body was not in a good spot. And at that time, low carb, high fat, I think actually made things a little bit worse for me, just because I was not in a good spot to begin with. And I never really bashed it, although I think I was kind of disappointed that something that seemed so magical and like promising was not becoming the solution to all my problems at the time. And in fact, maybe making me worse.
Sure.
But I'm so glad that happened, because come full circle, getting good health back and whatnot. And I'm pretty low carb these days. I'm also definitely not training like how I used to, and nor are my stress levels anywhere near what they used to be. And low carb, high fat I'm thriving off of it. And it's not low carb to the sense of a ketogenic diet. It's kind of finding out what, how I can time carbs appropriately to feel best and perform well in workouts. And then also, what are my ideal ranges of carbs per day? And then within that, what carbohydrate sources work for me and which ones don't. So there's a lot of experimenting you need to do as an individual here. But I think at the end of the day, endurance athletes just really, really need to, I think, understand that more fat in the diet is only going to work for them, not against them. And it's the carbs and the sugar that are actually proving to be more evil and detrimental to their health and performance. But sadly, what that ties back into is the whole idea that sports marketing or sports nutrition companies that need to market their products, how are they going to make money telling people to go eat bacon? You can't really have like a bacon fat gel. I don't think that would work.
Somebody will try.
Maybe after hearing this, right?
I'll taste it.
I would too. Heck, I save my bacon fat and use it for cooking. So,
Yeah, for sure. But let's talk about you're tinkering around with carbs and low carb. Like you said, you're not necessarily dipping into ketosis, but you are controlling them, restricting them in some way. Which ones are good? Which ones are bad? What'd you find out?
Well, it gets a little complicated here too, because I did actually also have another issue going on that I think stemmed from potentially, more of a carb-based diet to begin with, and some other things where I had Candida for a while, so a bacterial overgrowth and yeast overgrowth in the gut. So that adds another dynamic of really having to monitor certain things and certain things with sugar, or, fermented yeast-based products or whatever. For me, like, I had to give up beer. I used to enjoy beer with my fiance, and now I can't even touch it, which is fine because I feel phenomenal without it. But it really comes down to then, I think, where these functional health tests can come into play. You can at least figure out, because I didn't know I actually had a bacterial overgrowth until I tested for it. I felt like I had the symptoms. I kind of had a clue, but this came in and really told me what was exactly going on. And so then you have, like, again, some ammo to work with here. Like, okay, so now looking at all the research, we know that keto is going to be, anything 50 grams or less per day. And that's probably an extreme thing to do for an endurance athlete. I know Ben Greenfield did it when he was training for the Ironman World Championships. I think it was 2013. And let's just say he's not keto, or as far as I know anymore. And so then you look at things like, well, how can I achieve, the ideal body composition, not getting too big and putting on fat, and not getting too lean where you dip under, for girls, you don't want to really be less than 14% body fat. And then you start running into some bigger issues there. So then tweaking these variables, and then also, how you feel good and working out. So really, that's why I like the principles of either paleo or, your approach with like the whole wild diet and everything. You're looking at real foods. You just eliminate the processed stuff to begin with. And for that matter, probably grains don't really have much of a place either. So of the whole natural occurring foods, which ones are going to be the best for you? So, and this is where it gets kind of tricky too, because the paleo community and everything, sweet potatoes, plantains, more of the starch-based vegetables definitely have their place. But me, for example, I can't do plantains. I was kind of still recovering from gut health issues. Plantains, I love them and it's fun to eat them, but they do not like me back. So, you kind of got to do an experiment here. And I really, really am a fan of people not getting too extreme with their diet, but still taking the time to do this like N=1 experiment on themselves. So, Phil Maffetone, again, bringing up his name, he has something called the 2-week test, where you eliminate things for 2 weeks and then you bring them back in and test for basically carb intolerance. But there's a million different ways to skin the cat. I mean, you don't even need necessarily a hardcore outline to do this. You just pretty much eliminate a lot of the carbs, whether drink or food sources, and then kind of bring them slowly back in one at a time to figure out what's a trigger food for you. What makes you, that's how I found out plantains didn't work for me, because when it's sort of muddled in with everything else, you may not be able to pinpoint it. And then it's just sort of developing your plan around then. And then I'm a huge fan, especially these days, of the whole idea of doses. So it's not then, say plantains don't work for me. It's not that I can never have a plantain again for the rest of my life. It's that I need to know what's my appropriate dose before things go bad.
Yeah.
And this also, I think, really translates into the real world, and especially people who have maybe had anxiety or stress over freaking out over what to eat, or, being afraid of gaining weight or whatever it is. Know that no matter what, if you have probably small, moderate doses of anything at any given time, you're going to be just fine.
Yeah.
But that whole like 80-20 rule, just know what's appropriate for you. So I know if I'm eating roughly around 100 to 200 grams a day, and that'll fluctuate a little bit with what my activity level is, and it's kind of in my list of my like safe carbs and whatnot, I'm perfectly fine. And, I can still satisfy cravings for things like pancakes and stuff like that, but make them using eggs and coconut flour and avocado versus the more traditional ingredients. And that kind of goes into the idea that people sometimes too just need, just that idea of getting educated through cookbooks like yours, how can we get more creative with these recipes and make them so nourishing and delicious for you? And then instead of having to resort back to the same old, white bread.
Right.
Banana
and peanut butter. I had a lot of that back in the day.
I know. Actually, we were crewing for the Badwater Ultra a couple weeks ago, and I did bring bananas, and I had almond butter with it, because there's really only so many portable foods you can bring on the road, and it was kind of a good treat that I wasn't used to having on a regular basis.
So just a little bit more on the carb side of things. Knowing everything that you know now, where do you keep it? How do you measure it?
That's a good question. And so again, I think what we really need to be careful with here too is not overstressing these things too much, because again, I think if you're stressed out so much about how many grams of carbohydrates or macronutrient ratios to begin with that you're shoving down your body every day, that stress is going to do more damage than probably a high carb diet. Like it will trump whatever you be eating the world's best diet, but if the stress levels are there, you're going to not see what you want. So if you have a healthy relationship with this journey and you look at it kind of like you're an experiment of one and you're just looking to optimize health and performance, there are several things you can do. And I'm actually a bigger fan of, food logging and tracking for a short period of time just to get an idea. Because then I think if you go too far with it, it becomes another obsession that you need to be careful with. Plus, it's just time consuming, and there's better ways you could be spending your time.
Yeah.
So if you log for 3 to 5 days, kind of figure out where you are. That's generally how you eat. You're probably going to be fine. And see what your carb ratios are. How does that change with activity level? A lot of high or more elite or amateur, it doesn't really matter, triathletes will find that maybe less than 100 grams of carbs a day is too low, but 150 to 200 is that ideal amount. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, if you were 400 grams plus a day, you're just going to feel bloated and nasty and sluggish and gross. So, also kind of cheating it by going maybe overboard just to see how crappy you do feel if you do too much. And then being able to dial in. And then once you kind of have that number in mind, trying to learn to be intuitive with it without necessarily having to log and keep track of everything.
Yeah.
Another good way to do it is actually measuring your blood glucose, which I'm on the fence about doing religiously because, again, it's, but I think it's important. I think it can give us valuable insight without having to needing to go to a lab or anything. You can do this yourself easily. And, you're looking to maintain anywhere between 80 and 90 at any given time. And you can test before, after you eat meals, or even with your workouts and everything, to see where you're at. And if, again, like I was saying before, like if you're constantly seeing these spikes and dips in your energy levels and in your blood glucose and everything, then we know we have a problem that needs to be solved. And then you can take the measures to solve that. And if you don't even want to go to the level of blood glucose monitoring, you can look at the signs, when someone's hypoglycemic, for example, and you see a lot of athletes talking about being hangry. So not just hungry, but hangry. I need to get food right now. And so that's not, I understand after an Ironman or something, that's probably going to be the case no matter what.
Sure. Yeah.
But you don't want to feel, You don't want to feel like that after every workout. Like that's not a good sign.
Yeah.
So
we're running low on time, but before we go, it seems like you're talking a lot about stress as the enemy, right?
Yeah.
What are some things that you do either in your training or in your day-to-day life that you find reduce that or mitigate it to some degree?
Yeah, this is still an ongoing journey for sure. Because
because you're a type A like me.
Exactly. But the fact that we both are running our own businesses the way we do, I don't know if you realize this, Abel, but our lives are actually extremely similar, very, very similar. I just kind of, following everything you do, I think that we have kind of similar paths and journeys and everything. And when you're kind of in charge of yourself like that, and you have, this drive to kind of perform, whether that's in work or life or sport,
sure.
It's easy to get stressed out over what's not happening or what's not being done, or that there could always be more that you could be doing and stuff. So I think it's about finding the things that are going to be your ability to change your attitude, perspective, or unwind and step away. For example, I used to be that person who jumped from one thing to another, barely even taking a breath in between. But like I was recording a podcast right before we got on the phone, and thankfully the timing worked out where I was able to take 30 minutes to just chill. I took a shower, refresh, kind of reset my mind. Instead of just feeling like, oh my God, I got to get to the next one, and like just always kind of being on the go, I've incorporated yoga into my life. Cool. And this started back in 2013. And that's been a huge, huge plus to just really turn off everything else and focus on the pose that needs to be done and nothing else in the world. And just feeling your body through that journey. There's a side benefit of unlocking a locked up, triathlete at that point too,
yeah, for sure.
In terms of imbalances. And lately, even something like meditation has come into my life. And I'm slowly kind of adapting to this one. I'm still finding struggle of being able to make time for that quiet time and committing to it. But when I do, there's actual real benefit to it. And then last but not least, I think having activities that have no performance component are huge for people like us.
Yeah.
Because we still like to feel that adrenaline rush, that high, or just that, for me, it's actually not even that as much as it is a connection with nature. So thankfully living here in Laguna Beach, I'll get out on my paddleboard and an hour or two will go by and it'll just be totally in the moment and present. And backpacking has also been one of those things. I think the ability to disconnect from all the social media, the emails, all the devices, and allow your brain to just take time away from that is huge. So those are probably my top things right now on stress management. But really what it comes down to is just attitude, and you have a choice. You have a choice to be stressed out or kind of let yourself get all blood boiling and everything or not. It's that easy.
And for someone who has a background in doing endurance sports, I think you have a big leg up. I know I did getting into something like meditation because for so many years there, I was going out on a run, but I was really just kind of meditating. I was going through all the noise in my head, dealing with issues, working on stuff. Because you go out for a 3-hour run, there's not a whole lot to do, generally speaking. You can't be looking at your watch the whole time. So,
well, these days we have Fat Burning Man or Endurance Planet to listen to.
That's a good point.
But I mean, that brings up a good point, though, because actually I had a friend of mine just ask me this over the weekend. Tawny, are you always listening to, your podcast or other podcasts when you're out running? And the answer is no. And how I approach it is, what is my mood that day? There's certain days when I just feel like I'm a sponge and I just want to download a million podcasts and listen to all of them on my long run. There's other days where I leave the phone entirely at home. There's other days where I want music, and that music could range various different, genres.
What's your jam?
It's so all over the place. Like everything from like hardcore rock to like rap to, more of like the reggae ska or even kind of like a Sublime kind of band. I don't even know what that really would be considered, to classical music, to classic rock. I mean, actually probably one of my all-time favorite albums to listen to while working out is Dark Side of the Moon by Pink Floyd.
Wow. Good call.
So random. And I actually I have to do this one again. I built a bike workout that perfectly aligns with the whole album. I did. It's an awesome workout. I have to dig it up. It's so good. And it's only 45-minute album, so it's actually a relatively short workout, but it's just so powerful because, as the music changing, you're changing whatever you're doing on the bike. It's good stuff.
That sounds amazing. I'm going to have to try that. Well, Tawny, thank you so much. Before we go, why don't you tell folks where they can find you and what you're working on now?
All right, so I have a few things. First of all, the podcast is Endurance Planet. I've actually been hosting this show since 2011, and we're putting out 2 to 3 shows a week all over the board. Like I said, we have Q&A shows. We also have special interviews, and we're also diving into cutting-edge stuff. Actually, Abel, you might appreciate the last one I just posted with Timothy Noakes and Phil Maffetone on hydration and electrolytes.
Cool.
Is pretty awesome stuff, and it's looking at things from a different perspective than we've traditionally been told. So Endurance Planet, easy to find, enduranceplanet.com, on all social media is the same. And then also my coaching website is coachtawny.com, and it's TAWNEE. I don't coach a lot of athletes, but I also do consultations for people who don't necessarily want the full-time, full-blown package. I don't do pre-written plans either, so it's either you hire me full-time or you consult, or, then I can, that's just how I roll. I don't do like kind of the in-between stuff. And then, like I said earlier, the blog is triton.com. And that's, you could dig in the archives and see race reports when I was still crazy into all the triathlon stuff. And you can read how things have evolved.
Yeah.
So,
awesome.
And then I'm on social media too. So I'm really easy to find.
Right on. Well, I think your journey is very inspiring to people who might be in the middle of working out or in a rut or, at the top of their performance, wherever it is. It's always a journey. And I think it's amazing to have people like you who are so open about it, because that's rare these days.
Well, thank you so much for bringing me on the show. Again, I'm a big fan. I love what you're doing. I think the information you're putting out is great, and I'm happy and honored to be a part of it.
Thank you so much. Well, we'll have to have you on again soon. Thanks again for listening to Fat Burning Man. Don't forget, before you go, check out fatburningtribe.com. If you have a question for me that you want answered about how to improve your performance, what to eat for dinner, how to drop fat quickly, how to improve your overall health, or anything else, we answer all of your questions there. So quickly, you can get the first month for just $1 for a limited time. Check it out at fatburningtribe.com. All right, I'll see you there.
There's another problem with paleo, and this harkens back to the Atkins days and why so many of the low-carb crowd are holding on to pounds they don't want to. I felt this when I lost my first 50 pounds.